This podcast is made possible by Planful.
Hello, this is Robert Alvarez, CFO of Big Commerce, and you're listening to the CFO Thought Leader podcast.
This is episode 838.
I woke up one morning and I said, well, wait a minute, right? We have over 200,000 pieces of data to look at to really understand what's going on in the labor market. And Gusto had been tracking all of this. I just hadn't been looking at it. And I said, maybe I should start looking at all those pieces of data because Gusto really has a front row seat as to what's happening in the labor market. And maybe that can give me some insight as to what's really going on in the macroeconomy. And of course, what's going on in the macroeconomy can have a reflection about how we drive sort of Gusto's investments as we think about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years ahead.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we speak with Mike Taylor, CFO of Gusto. Having served in several CFO roles over the last 2 decades, Mike Taylor has a rich career portfolio from which to extract his CFO lessons. Nevertheless, he quickly turns our attention to his nearly decade-long tenure at electric car manufacturer Tesla, where he held a number of senior finance positions. It was during the early years of Tesla's groundbreaking Model S that Taylor recalls a financial analyst sharing with him some analysis that revealed how a certain modification to door handles could result in a per-car savings of hundreds of dollars. In an industry where savings per vehicles are measured in quarters and single dollars, the insight into door handles was a windfall. Or maybe not. CFO Mike Taylor explains why, and much more after this. With so much change around us and your need for increasing agility, you have to equip your team to win, and you have to do it now. Join over 1,300 companies of all sizes using Planful to help plan and execute with greater confidence. Planful integrates your critical financial processes to serve the data you need, insights you demand, and the answers necessary to manage your business optimally. Planful lets you plan better, close faster, and report more accurately. And Planful's not just for finance and accounting. It's for the entire business to plan, collaborate, and drive increased financial performance. Take full control of how you administer and manage all of your financial processes and data, and put finance first collaboration at the heart of every decision. When finance is a team sport, you can be a champion. With Planful, you'll be a champion of finance. Get in the game by going to planful.com to learn more. Hello, we're speaking with Mike Taylor, CFO of Gusto. Mike, welcome.
Thanks, Jack. Glad to be here.
So, Mike, I don't often start out this way, but I'm going to ask you the same question as usual that I always do, where you look back and you try to identify some of the experiences you feel prepared you for a CFO role. But what I want to do is I just want to share, you have what I would call a high-calorie resume. So I just want to mention a few items. And so please correct me if my shorthand gets anything wrong here. But a couple of items jumped out at me. First of all, you spent over 9 years at Tesla Motors, where you were a VP of Finance, treasurer in the new markets area. You've had CFO tours of duty that bookend your Tesla, let's call it a decade. That is, you were a CFO before Tesla and after. Most recently, before joining Gusto in January 2022, you were CFO of GitHub, where you were for 5 years. And before Tesla, you held CFO appointments at Tropos Networks and Benchmark Capital. If we go back further, we'll see in the 90s, you spent a few years at Goldman Sachs and you picked up an MBA and a law degree at Stanford. How did I do? Am I?
You did pretty well. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to share that up front. And again, I don't often do that. I thought it would be more meaningful for the listener when I ask, so what are those experiences you feel prepared you for the CFO role? Clearly, you have a pretty good fix on what's you found helpful along the way. And what were those experiences? So anyway, if I hadn't set expectations too high, what would you share with us in response to that question?
I look back even further to some of the formative experiences. A lot of us when we're growing up, you find that teacher, you find that early mentor that really helps set your values in the right way. And so for me, I think the values are working hard, being always grounded in data, and having a service mindset. And so those all go all the way back to high school, where my most favorite teacher was Father John Glenn. I went to a Catholic high school, and I took 4 years of Latin with Father Glenn. And he taught me, translating Latin line by line is an arduous exercise. And you had to just sit down and you had to do it. You had to put in the time, and you had to, what he would call, pay the price. And so I learned very early on that I could be good at something if I paid the price kitty. And he would always call me kitty. And that's just that one of those things just sort of stuck with me, right? And so I've always been the person that's going to work hard, put in the effort, put in the time to do things right, right? Then sort of like grounding in data, I've got a nice anecdote to share with you. So I had a internship at the Department of Commerce when I was in college, and it was with the Business Issues and Analysis Division. And that was a division that at that time computed the CPI. And so at that time, without dating myself, let's just say there were a lot of dot matrix printers and a lot of stacks of paper when you go into the office, and everybody was compiling all this data, and you could barely see the people behind the stacks of all the paperwork. But the only thing you could see was a little plaque on the desk that said, "In God we trust, all others bring data." And that to me really stuck out. And then, Jim Barksdale from the Netscape years was famous for saying, you all, are we having a meeting about data? Because I like meetings about data. If we're not, then maybe we're having a meeting about opinions. And if we're doing that, then let's just go with mine, and so we don't have to have the meeting, right? And so for me, those two things sort of came together as, really making sure that you're grounding in data. And that really helped me become, I think, a very good CFO, because I always try and bring data to meetings. I always like to back my opinions up with some data, right? I think that helps me. The third sort of leg of that stool is an overall service mindset. So that I got in full spades with Goldman Sachs, actually. And I had the privilege of working for a remarkable individual, David Blood, who is now sort of one of our investors at Gusto. And I would prepare these things for him at night. You're working very hard as a financial analyst. It's your first job, right? And you want to get everything right. And I thought that, I was computing for something for him that night. And I said, you know what? I'll leave it on his desk, and I'll get early in the morning. I'll just recheck the figures one last time, right? I got in at around 6:30 a.m. He was already there. And he said, Mike, I've looked at your numbers. I found an error, right? And your name is on this memo. Let's not find that error again. I've corrected it for you this time, but let's not find that again. And I said, wow, that was a really great way of teaching me a lesson, to be very diligent in the work. But I took away from it, it's, wow, if he took that time to sort of be coaching to me, that the best thing that I could do was employ a service mindset and sort of help him become better at his job. And if I could be excellent at mine, then he could be just a little bit better at his. And that sort of just always stuck with me, is that I always want to make people better around me. And if I can help them do that, then I think that really helps me become a better CFO.
One of the things that struck me is that you seemed, though, to move into industry somewhat quickly. I mean, again, you had 9 years at Tesla, so you made quite an investment there, but you weren't in investment banking a decade, which is sometimes what we see. We see finance leaders come out of, jump into a corporate job out of Wall Street after 10 years. You seem to move into, and correct me if I'm looking at items incorrectly, but you seem to move in quickly. And I'm wondering, I'm like, wow, maybe he was already on the CFO track. Maybe he wanted to get into a corporate environment and have climbed the ranks so he could become a CFO. I doubt it's that clean, but can you clarify what I just shared, if I'm accurate? Or
Yeah, it would be, I think it would be a little bit unwise for me to say that I've always had a grand plan to become a CFO, right? I think coming out of business school, I wanted to go into venture capital originally, and I thought that would be a great plan. And I got some great advice from a person at a venture capital company that said, like, Mike, you're smart, you're very smart. We think you have got a great potential in this, but before you come into venture capital, why don't you take an operating role? And why don't you understand really what it takes to become a really good investor by understanding what actually goes on in companies? And I took that to heart. And I said, that's a great idea. And then I turned right back to him and I said, do you have any portfolio companies you'd like me to join? Because I could probably help you. And he said, well, that's a great idea. Here's a couple. And that's how I got my start in the finance world. And then from there, Jack, it was really, I love learning every day on the job. And so you take a look at my career, and I was always taking jobs where maybe I was a little bit out of my comfort zone. Certainly joining Tesla Motors and doing automobile manufacturing when no automobile manufacturer has been successful for 50 years up to that point. That was a little bit of leap of faith, a little bit of trust in yourself and trust in the individuals around you. So, but it's always been driven by that passion to learn something new.
can I just touch on that with you, because that is interesting? You had a number of CFO tours of duty, like we like to say here, before Tesla, and you jump into Tesla, and back in that time, company wasn't the size, of course, the one we know today. Did your colleagues or friends wonder what you're up to, or because it seems like you could have gone to your next CFO gig? And can you share with us what did, again, colleagues look at you a little strange? Yeah.
They really did. And a lot of the people that are my mentors today told me that, the last thing you want to do is join a capital intensive company and then people reminded me that electric cars had failed at least a couple of times before. So people have been there and tried, and and many entrepreneurs had tried and failed at this. So I got a lot of skeptics, but for me, like, that decision went down to another thing that's driven me in my career is just a deep customer empathy, a deep customer focus. So what happened, Jack, is I said, after sort of hanging up on the friend that introduced me to that job for a couple of times, I said, you know what? Let me do my due diligence and let me look into this. And then I started to look at the Tesla blogs, where they had sold at that time probably several hundred roadsters, sight unseen, undriven, right, for $100,000 plus per car, right? And the passion of the customers for what the company was doing, what the car could do, coming them all together, you just saw a deep customer appreciation for the value that company could create and the joy and the delight that they could create in their customers. And so I remember I spent hours and hours looking at the blogs and looking at sort of all the customer forums. And I thought, my God, with something with this customer passion, how can I not take this leap, right? When you have those passionate customers, you at least have a foundation that that there's something you can rely on to help sort of grow the company and grow your personal career. So that was what really did it for me.
Great, great. Thank you for that. Just one other thought I had, and you can again correct me. I find it interesting, both your at Tropos Networks as well as at GitHub. You were there for more than 5 years as CFO in, believe, both these companies. It looks like you made, again, an investment of years. What I don't see is the transactional CFO resume where you jump on board and you're there 18 months or something. Again, having looked at so many resumes, I'm like, well, he's coming here to do something.
And this is clearly not just about a transaction.
How'd I do?
Yeah, like again, sort of you're very insightful and sort of looking at looking at the trends on the resume there, Jack. The question is sort of like, why did I join Gusto? And when I take a look at that, there's a number of things that came into alignment for me in that overall decision. First, there was just when we talk about sort of customer empathy and what Gusto is able to deliver for over 200,000 businesses, small and medium-sized businesses in the US, there is that deep sort of connection to the customer. I used to be a customer of the product, so I knew what the value the company was delivering, and I knew that peace of mind that Gusto said that they delivered, they actually did, right? And so that was helpful. The values of the service mindset, it's on our website. Like we think it's a privilege to serve all those businesses and help solve sort of real critical tasks. So there was a little bit of what we call the what and the how that came together for me when I looked at Gusto, and I just saw that deep alignment of both of that what and the how of that said, this is a really interesting place that I really want to be a part of. And if I can help it have the impact in the world that I think it can have by becoming that critical infrastructure of the nation's economy, then that's a good use of time, right? And that's what I like to do.
Well, tell us about Gusto then. Tell us about these offerings. And we have had other finance leaders sort of in a similar space. So I find it interesting to talk to you today, given the background that you have. Tell us about Gusto. What does its company do? What are its offerings today?
Sure. So I'll give you sort of the high level overview. So Gusto is a people platform, right? We serve over 200,000 businesses today and help them sort of solve really critical pain points that they have in helping to grow their business. So it's things like helping their employees get paid, offering benefits to their employees, creating a great onboarding experience for their employees, helping to file their corporate taxes, helping to create that great linkage between employee and employer that can exist if you create sort of moments of magic, right? We do that all with a really simple to use, software as a service platform. So it's all online. We have separate plans, all monthly plans that our customers can select. And we do that with a very, very deep focus on customer empathy in choosing what to invest in and what to build. So we like to say that the leaders and the owners and the entrepreneurs of those over 200,000 businesses, they're making really critical decisions each and every day. They're wearing 20 hats, right? If we have the privilege of maybe taking 5 or 6 of those hats off of their heads, then boy, by helping them build their businesses, and their businesses are the backbone of the United States economy, then we're creating a really great mission for Gusto.
And in the not too distant past, 3 acquisitions within 4 months after the company hadn't acquired the first 9 years, I guess. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, and again, did they precede? Did these acquisitions are these on your during your tenure since the start of the year, or are these prior?
The decisions were done prior, but the implementation and sort of helping those businesses get integrated into Gusto's offerings, that's under my watch.
So I guess what also intrigues me here is this space. Again, we spent a lot of time talking to finance leaders about talent, about measuring employee engagement, trying to understand better how finance leaders are trying to measure it and look into the business so they can do a better job managing talent. A lot of them are just discovering as part of their responsibilities. In the past, it really hasn't. In the tech realm, they're a little more forward thinking, and that's where you have some of the really interesting discussions. But it's a discussion that's suddenly branching out into other industries from what we can tell.
Yeah.
So to find you here, and given what you shared about your originally about data in your past, suddenly we're seeing things about employee relationships with their organizations that we haven't been able to see before. We're able to track interactions. We're able to understand better performance of employees. How am I doing? Is this Gusto's realm, or am I going a little too broad?
Well, we help our customers with performance managements, with surveys, with other things that sort of deepen that relationship to help employees grow their careers inside of their employers. So that is a core part of our offering, as well as the HR tools that we can offer to businesses to help them do that in, again, what we hope is a very empathetic and a very kind way to help nurture that relationship between the employee and the employer.
So let's ask you about your lines of sight then. Again, this will help us understand better. So what are the numbers you're looking at before your first cup of coffee in the morning? I know it's unit economics as being a SaaS solution, so you don't have to tell us about renewable revenues, but we do want to understand better. If we could just go a little deeper with you to understand better some of the realizations that you've had as you look at these metrics, what you're paying attention to, really.
Sure. Yeah, I think the biggest change that we're all looking at, I think there's two big changes. There's how has COVID impacted sort of where the small medium-sized businesses are hiring employees, how fast they're hiring. I think that's one sort of thread. The other sort of thread is that we start to take a look at the economy as a whole, and we start to see, there seems to be this dichotomy with a weakening overall economy, but yet an extremely strong labor market. And so that's been really intriguing to me. And so I said, I woke up one morning and I said, well, wait a minute, right? We have over 200,000 pieces of data to look at to really understand what's going on in the labor market. And maybe I was a little bit slow to the punch there, Jack. But of course, Gusto had been tracking all of this. I just hadn't been looking at it. And I said, maybe I should start looking at all those pieces of data, because Gusto really has a front row seat as to what's happening in the labor market. And maybe that can give me some insight as to what's really going on in the macroeconomy. And of course, what's going on in the macroeconomy can have a reflection about how we drive sort of Gusto's investments as we think about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years ahead. And so when I wake up in the morning, I look at macroeconomic statistics through the lens of Gusto. And I love to take a look at like all the new businesses that are being formed in the United States. We have that macroeconomic data, but then you look at our data and you can see how many hires people are making sort of each and every week in our data, how many terminations they're making, how many hours that their employees are working. So some of the insights, it was really interesting. It's hiring in our base is exceptionally strong, maybe not exceptionally strong, but still strong, right? And but what's interesting is the hours that people are working is also starting to trend up. So you can think like, okay, let's correlate that with what we hear about the strong labor market. And what I think I would do as a business owner is I would want to keep and retain the employees that I have. I might be a little bit hesitant to invest in new employees, right? But the ones that I have, I might ask to work an extra shift, right? And I think we start seeing that some in our data. So those are things that we're looking at sort of going forward to figure out how we actually manage Gusto's businesses.
As far as talent metrics are concerned, for you as CFO, you can see net new hires. That's there. That's visible to you. There's some sort of attrition metric that you're paying a close attention to, one would imagine. And again, we've seen a lot of headlines around quiet quitting is the phrase that's grabbed recent headlines. It's all part of the same thing, this great resignation or this sort of realignment with talent.
But engagement seems to be at the root of things.
Do you agree, or can you share anything on employee engagement and whether you feel as if you have the lines of sight into that you require?
It's in terms of our customer base, no, we don't have great visibility into that. Or we might, but I haven't seen sort of the data relative to that. We do internally at Gusto, making sure that we measure engagement through periodic surveys. That's a big part of what we do, because as your workforce gets more and increasingly more remote, you want to make sure that they have the connection and they feel that they're getting value out of working at Gusto, and we're helping them sort of in their overall careers. So we pay deep attention to that data for sure.
Is there these acquisitions that you've recently done? Have they brought the offerings into is it new areas, or are you augmenting some of your existing technology? Or
let me take a step back and let's start with what I call the nucleus of Gusto, which is that connection between the employee and the employer, as represented as finance people through a paycheck, right? So now once you have that data and once you have that relationship, then you can understand sort of, okay, how do we help people onboard employees, right? For example, how do we help companies offer benefits to the employees? And then, we all have the deductions that come out of our paychecks for things like 401ks or things like Section 125 benefits, or things like just our overall healthcare premiums and the copays, right? So you start to see that having that nucleus gives you, if you nurture that relationship and you deliver value for your customers, it gives you the right to offer them additional things that they would be happy to pay for because you're delivering that value. So now the acquisitions, right? So one acquisition we did had a nice product that helped with international contractors. So you and I are starting a business and we find somebody over in the UK that can really help us sort of with our podcast and help us moderate the podcast. Like, how do you pay that person? Well, we can now help you go do that with the functionality brought in from the acquisition, right? Another acquisition that we did was around R&D tax credits. So as a founder of that business, we're investing in technology. The federal government allows us to have a tax credit for that investment, right? Now, when you look at that, we know sort of all the employees that you have, right? And if you help us understand what they're doing, if they're doing R&D and other creative work that qualifies under the exemption, then now we know how much you've paid them. We know how much you've invested in them. It's fairly easy for us to say, here's the tax credit that you might be due. And that's another company, Ardius, that we bought, so that now you can think of us as, we started off in payroll. We're adding benefits. We're adding other jobs to be done to help businesses nurture that employee-employee relationship. And now we're helping people pay internationally. And now we're helping people save money, businesses save money by taking advantage of the tax credits that are available. And all those things come from that nucleus, that relationship between the employee and the employer that we're just privileged to help enable.
But when you think about FP&A talent in your organization and how you as a finance leader like to deploy it, use it, can you share anything about your philosophy there? Or is it pretty standard, like so many other finance leaders, or no?
Tell us about it.
It might, I would hope it would be standard because it's really worked well for me, right? And what's worked well is that I think when you're looking at the FP&A function, right, you eventually want your colleagues to become really great business partners, right? Now, that's a status that you have to earn, right? Trust is earned in drops and lost in buckets, right? You have to earn that relationship. How do you earn that? You earn that by helping people figure out sort of how to manage within their plans. You help them by figuring out how to use data to inform some of the decisions in their businesses, what products to offer, where to invest additional technology. You try and bring data, and sometimes, Jack, you bring a spreadsheet to a meeting, and you start seeing, you put a spreadsheet up on the monitor, and then all of a sudden people start seeing cells change, and really great FP&A people, they're not using the mouse, they're using the keyboard because they know all the shortcuts, and all of a sudden in 2 minutes you have a neat little P&L that you can bring up into a meeting, and now you have the ability to bring data and bring a financial analysis to part of that decision making, right? That's earning the right to be a business partner. And so when you talk about sort of measuring sort of the impact of FP&A people, I look at it as the number of meetings that you get invited to, not necessarily the number of meetings that you invite others to, right? People want to draw you into the conversation, right? That gives you a front row seat about what you're thinking. And so then when there comes an issue with a budget or a planning thing, you understand what the business wants to create, and you can be a partner with helping them solve any particular issue that comes up. And so I really love to coach people and see people emerge into that role and have other senior leaders in the company say, "Oh, Mike, thank God you have this person because they're just fantastic. They're really helping me run the business." Right? Versus the person that's just pulling up the budget versus actual and saying, like, "Oh, you missed that number. What are you going to do about that? Because we're both going to get in trouble." Right? That's the real, like, growing the FP&A function. I just think it's a ton of fun because you see all those people become CFOs and, in fact, some CEOs that I've been privileged to help sort of work with too. It's really fun.
Number of your FP&A people are down the hall having a conference. Seldom do they get the chance to catch up with each other, but the door swings open and Mike Taylor walks in. What do they think Mike's going to ask them?
The first thing is, how was your weekend? Right? Um, you have to develop a mutual trust with people. You have to understand what's motivating people, where they are in their lives, what they want to accomplish, right? So you can help them in their careers. So it always starts for me with a personal side of things. I think the other thing they expect is, like, when Mike walks into a room, Mike's going to ask a question about data. Mike's also going to ask about opinions, right? And he's going to ask you about how those opinions are influenced by data, right? To help sort of everybody become on the same page, because we have to, as a finance organization, as an FP&A organization, we have to model what we want the rest of the organization to do. If we're not asking ourselves those same questions, holding ourselves to the same standards, then we really don't have the right to ask that of our business partners. So it starts from within, it starts with the team, model the right behavior, right? And then the organization follows.
Again, just going back to some of what you shared as we discussed the early years, more or less, the emphasis you placed on data there, I found interesting because, let's face it, there was nearly not as much data available or digitally visible as there is today. And I'm wondering, and again, you walked into a CFO role more than 20 years ago, so you have this pointed perspective from today all the way back to what the role was then. And I'm wondering how this emphasis on data that you keep on driving home, how it's maybe changed the role in some way. When you think about how you operated in your first CFO role versus today, what's available to you in terms of that visibility into the data. maybe you're going to say it's actually not unlike that original role, but here's what's different. I don't know. But it would be interesting to hear from you whether this role has in some way been altered because and do you lead differently because of that visibility, that data that's available? Don't know.
Let me offer a couple of points. I do think that, for one, that the proliferation of data, especially sort of industry specific, when you're in the SaaS business, you have an online platform, you have a wealth of data about how customers are using your platform, how they're deriving value for it, right? And so that has, in my last couple of roles, that has meant that me as a leader is like, I want to have a business operations focus, and I want to have people that know how to do SQL and know how to get into a data warehouse, know how to help people construct the data that they want the product to deliver so they can make insights and decisions on that data, right? I think that has certainly changed, right? And I learned that in a major way at GitHub because we had millions and millions of people using the platform, open source developers using the platform. And so the decision really, Jack, was what data do you look at, right? And once you're looking at that, what insights can you derive from that data? So that's required a different skill set in your team to understand first what's important about the business and what's important so much about the business that you want to get the engineers and the product designers to actually build that capability to get that data into the product, right? You have to do that. And so right after we're done building the product, then a financial analyst comes by and says, well, wait a minute, can you make sure that this event is logged in the database so I can go back later and do it, right? You have to be very targeted when you make that request of people because you're taking away engineering time from them actually creating the product versus creating the infrastructure to monitor that product, right? So you need that empathy for the engineering folk with your team. You need that passion for data, and you need to help convince folks all around you that yes, we should build that in the product because here's the insights we could get from it. That has become much more easier now as people know the value of data, but all the way back, several years ago was very, very hard to do. The other thing I would say is I think consistent through those experiences when you look at data, there is something about how hard you look for the right set of data. So for example, I had the privilege, Stephen Allett was the CFO over a company called Micromuse way back in the 1990s, former McKinsey consultant, as CFO. And I'm sure that some of your listeners are saying oh, I know McKinsey, they have frameworks, they have a very structured way of thinking, right? This person was a partner at McKinsey. Stephen was a partner at McKinsey. And so every meeting I had with him was, let's start with a clean sheet of paper and let's create the value tree or the profit tree, right? It's like, what's profit? It's revenue minus cost. What's revenue? It's P times Q. And you start exploding that out and you create that tree. Well, he really created that framework in me to disaggregate a problem into the core sets of data that you need to go establish. So for example, if we're growing an enterprise sales function, then, it's easy. It's the average price per sale times the number of salespeople. That you think it's easy, right? And then you go, well, wait a minute. Well, there's a productivity ramp in those salespeople. So now, okay, right. It's not actually the salesperson. It's the type of salesperson that you have. Well, then actually it's a region, right? Some people have a better region than others. And so you can see how that kind of explodes over time, right? But once you create that and once you know what data to go look for, then you can start collecting it, right? And we used to do that back on spreadsheets, and it was just as relevant then because you use that data. What I love to do is plan the work and work the plan, right? So you plan the work, you create that value tree, and you say, aha, what I have to work on is not just hiring more sales reps, but actually working on their ramp. Because if I can get them ramped 6 months rather than 9 months, boy, I can drive a lot more value into the organization. And then you say, well, how am I going to drive that ramp? And then you start talking to people. And then you figure out, oh, well, if we did this, this, and this, we could take that. We could take that ramp down from 9 months to 6 months, right? And now what you've done is you started to catalyze initiatives inside the company that were based on financial data, that were based on your work, that's now going to help the overall company improve its overall performance. And that was a formative experience for me, because going back and planning that work and then working that plan into the organization, that is not just value creating for an FP&A person. That's where the fun really starts, because now you're adding value, and then it goes back to the trust, because now you're building trust in the organization and you're earning that right to be in those meetings.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mike, for that. Great context for us, and it really explains it well for us. Appreciate it. We're up to what we like to refer to as our finance strategic moment. You've had many of these throughout your career. We wanted to create a sort of a question or a part of the podcast where we would offer an opportunity where you could share sort of a moment of insight that you had along the way as a CFO or in your early years as a finance executive, where a moment of insight allowed you to see an opportunity or a risk, something unique to finance, though, and finance leadership that sets it apart from all the other types of business leaders and functions. Anything come to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
Yeah, let me tell let me tell you this story. It's a story about understanding customer value, and cost is not the only driver, right? So I'll go back to the Tesla days where the model, when we were creating the Model S, right? We wanted to have auto presenting door handles. So these door handles would appear as you walked to the car and allowed you to get into the Model S. And we wanted them to be flush with the overall components of the car, and which effectively translated into an impossible manufacturing cost. Because when you think of the geometry of the car, most cars have 4 exactly identical door handles, and they do that because of cost, because now it's 4 handles per car versus just 1. Model S was different. They were all, originally in the day, they were all milled out of aluminum, right? They were all had a precise geometric shape that had to be fit into the door. And then they had to, in the space of, maybe 6 inches, had to actuate outside of the door. And so you can start thinking about it from an engineering standpoint, incredibly complex. Okay, incredibly complex to make, incredibly complex to do, incredibly complex to install on the vehicle, right? So a financial analyst comes in. And says, wait, I've got a great idea. Let's make them all the same, right? And this auto present idea is really great, but we can save hundreds of dollars in the price of the car. And this, in the car industry, you're looking for quarters and dollars all through the bill of materials, right? So when you're talking hundreds of dollars, it's like, this is a fantastic moment for a financial analyst, because now you figured it out. You can drive a whole bunch of margin, straight margin to the line as you're reducing the cost of the car. So you come up with this great idea and you say, that's great. This is what we're going to go do, right? And so my team came up with this, and we said, this is the greatest idea ever. We should just go do it, right? Yet the company didn't do it. We didn't want to do it. And with the idea got shot down, and we scratched our heads. And so I went and I talked to some of the designers, and I said, well, why, right? This is like, we all have these cost down targets. Why did this happen? And he said, Mike, what's the first tangible experience that you have with a car? Right? And I said, well, I see it and I walk up to it and then I touch the door handle. And it's like, have you touched the door handle? Have you actually worked it? Right? It's, the car welcomes you, right? And it makes you feel that it's unique and it's going to be a delightful experience. And that's what we were trying to create. And so I went back and I thought about that, and I said, you know what? I just learned a lesson. I learned a lesson that in product design and focusing on the customer and what the customer was going to do, was going to help drive our overall sales. And that was the most important thing, not my cost. So I tell that to FP&A people and saying, like, listen, your spreadsheets can tell you a whole lot about the car and about sort of what you should do, a whole lot about any business situation. But focus first on what the customer impact of your product is, right? And make sure you include that lens into the customer, into your analysis. It's going to help you make a better decision, because now people are writing and blogging about the Model S door handles, and people really love them.
Hi, it's Jack. I hope you're enjoying our talk with CFO Mike Taylor of Gusto. Next, Gusto's finance leader encourages future finance leaders to spend time thinking about the how you go about getting things done, not just the milestones, but how they were achieved, your actions, your approach. You'll hear about that next during our mentoring round.
I want you to think back, and this is really sort of a leadership question. I want you to think back to that first CFO appointment, and you were only there a short while, 30 days, 60 days. All that leadership responsibility was finally yours. What would you go back in time if you had to offer yourself a piece of advice that first 30 or 60 days? What is it that you would tell yourself?
I would look back and I would say, Mike, focus on the longer term, right? We all have day-to-day issues. Sometimes the urgent trumps the important, right? It happens in every job that I've been in. But if you keep that long-term focus about really helping the organization keep long-term building, not just delivering long-term value for your customer, but building your organization for the long term, being just making sure that the how you do things is just as important as the what, like how much money you actually raise, or how much dollars you actually save, or how fast you overclose the books, right? Look back and be proud of the how in that relationship, because you're building relationships with people, with customers that are going to give you great value, great insight as you progress in life. And so I've always thought, I've had the benefit of working with people that think, sometimes in multi-planetary views in the survival of the human species, right? Keep that long-term focus and keep knowing that you're building your individual brand, you're building your individual integrity. Be proud of the how as you get there, and it's going to be okay.
Just given the answers that we often get to this next question, I would tell you that it's probably the hardest question of, at least for finance leaders. We ask for a personal habit, or we ask for part of a daily routine, something that they themselves do and they're known for. And, exercising, no, that's, what sets you apart, Mike, when people meet you, know you, people who, and it might be something that a family member would tell us. This is just what Mike does. This is how he has this unique habit. He has this routine. Anything you can share with us about yourself?
I was going to go with the exercise route, because I will put a plug in there. Like, I think that that's important. It's important to do in the morning, because then the urgent trumps the important. So you always want to do that. I think what people would say is, certainly for my direct reports, and I would say for just about anybody in the company, I always want to have an open door. And if there's an issue that somebody has, that I have the opportunity to even take off my CFO hat and just talk to people and help them with their careers or help them with an issue, I think people would say Mike's always available to do that. No matter how busy he is, he's always available to find 5 or 10 minutes to help me work through my issue. And I've always found that I like to do something nice for at least one person every other day. or every day, every other day, that would be hard, but every day. And I think that's always been a guiding principle to me. And
Is that a mental note you make? Is that something you feel as if it's structured? I mean, you get to the end of the day and you realize you didn't do it, and you're like, okay, tomorrow I'm going to make sure it happens. It reveals your nature in some way. Yeah.
I would say I feel disappointed if I haven't made somebody's day a little bit better every day, right? Either whether that's through a joke or through an anecdote or through coaching or through just sharing sort of a personal experience. If I really like to make people laugh too, because, we spend a lot of time with the people that we work with. Let's make that an enjoyable experience. Let's learn something. Let's employ sort of a growth mindset as we're doing it. But if we can have fun along the same time, then boy, that's creating the relationships that we all want.
Mike, would you have a book recommendation for us? Doesn't have to be a business book. Might be just something you read to escape with.
Yeah. Oh, so I would recommend to folks, if you're interested in operations or manufacturing, there's a great book called "The Goal" by I forget who the author is. I should have known it, but it's a fantastic.
Goldrat, Eli.
Yeah, it's Goldblatt, right?
No, it's Eli Goldrat, Ratt. For those who might not know, it's a business novel. It's really unusual, but it's a great choice. We haven't had it in a while, so it's always great to put out there once more. And I want to just apologize. I took threw a few extra questions your way. We're tight on time. We're up to our final question.
We want you to look forward finally and look over the next 12 months and share with us, what are your priorities as a finance leader over the coming 12 months?
Okay. I think like the priority over the next 12 months is to think more about the next 36, right? And try and have that long-term vision of where, like, Gusto has always been a company is that we're building a company for the long term. We want to build a great, durable business. And so we challenge ourselves to look past the quarter, to look past the years, to look to 2025. We have a G25 plan that we try and execute against us that guides us as our North Star of what we want to create. I'm really looking forward in the next 12 months to helping that sort of plan evolve, helping us create that plan, and then looking forward to the G30 plan, because I really think this company has, with the values and the customer value that we're able to create, I think it's going to be around for a long time. And I just love to sort of be a part of it.
Mike Taylor, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thank you, Jack.
Hello, listeners. Do us a favor. Be certain to subscribe to CFO Thought Leader on Apple Podcasts, or if you're an Android user, check us out on Spotify or Google Play. If you like the show, please recommend it to a friend.